Every ranger who entered these forests left a map behind, but the woods kept redrawing them. What they discovered out here wasn't wildlife. It was something watching and waiting. Tonight, Dread Scribe writes again. Before we begin, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. And if there's a story you'd like me to cover next, I'd love to hear it too. The Smoky Mountains were never truly silent, yet the kind of quiet that surrounded my outpost wasn't natural. It was the kind of stillness that seemed aware of itself, like a breath being held by something vast and unseen. When I first arrived, I thought the isolation would be peaceful. Weeks without human contact sounded like a cure for the noise of the world. But by the second night, I realized the silence here wasn't an absence of sound. It was an observation. Every night around 2 a.m., when the forest exhaled its fog across the pines, I began noticing pairs of eyes glinting in the dark. Not moving, not blinking, just reflecting light that shouldn't have existed without a source. I told myself it was deer, maybe coyotes, but something about their placement, too high, too deliberate, gnawed at me. I started keeping notes. Eyes appear north ridge, same height, same distance apart. The scientist in me wanted a pattern. The human in me wanted a reason to stop looking. The station lights flickered whenever I stared too long. Once I shut them off entirely to see what the night really looked like. I regretted it instantly. Without artificial light, the world around me didn't turn black. It turned aware. Shapes within the mist rearranged, as if the trees themselves were pivoting toward me. I switched the lights back on and laughed, too loud and too forced. But that laughter didn't sound like my own. I installed motion cameras the next morning, 6 of them, covering every angle of the clearing. I reviewed the footage every night before bed. The first night's playback froze me. The feed looped the same 30 seconds over and over. Wind in the branches static, then nothing. No movement, no glitches, just time itself refusing to move forward. When I reset the system, the timestamp still read 0200. It hadn't just looped, it had stopped recording reality. I contacted the ranger station in Gatlinburg. Static answered. My radio hissed faintly, forming what almost sounded like words. I leaned closer, heart pounding. Between the distortion, I could swear I heard a voice whisper my name, slow, drawn out, as if testing its sound. I turned off the radio and wrote it off as frequency interference, but my hand trembled too much to finish the note. By the end of the week, the forest's silence began to feel sentient. Each night I heard faint tapping on the glass, like fingernails brushing curiosity across the window. Sometimes I'd wake to the sound of footsteps just outside the cabin, measured, patient, circling. When I opened the door, nothing but fog, yet the condensation on the glass always formed a perfect oval, like the imprint of a watching eye. That night I stayed awake until dawn, staring back into the woods, refusing to blink. It felt like a test, some ancient wordless ritual between watcher and watched. But as the sky lightened and my eyelids fell heavy, I wondered, what happens when the watcher grows tired first? The forest didn't move, but I swear the eyes did. I made a rule. If the forest wanted my attention, it would have to earn it. The next night, I set all 6 cameras to different frame rates, isolated the power lines with a battery array, and logged each step with the care of a surgeon. I taped over the wall clock so it couldn't hypnotize me into measuring dread. Then I dragged a chair onto the porch and stared into the pines the way a lighthouse stares into weather. You don't reason with fog, you outlast it. At 1:52 a.m., the wind settled like a hand smoothing a blanket. The eyes returned, pairs, triples, a constellation stitched between trunks. They were not animals. They hovered too high, too still, like reflections hung on invisible nails. I tried a rational ladder, retro-reflective fungi, dew on bark, distant cabins. But the angles refused geometry. Each time I blinked, they reappeared in a slightly different arrangement, as if the forest kept shuffling a deck whose cards were me. Curiosity pressed forward. To test the loop, I closed my eyes and counted to 10. By 4, gravel shifted. By 7, the porch boards creaked. At 10, I opened them to find the nearest pair just inside the clearing, perfectly aligned with my pupils. Heat rose through my body like a trapped flare. I held my gaze until tears pooled, then wiped them and laughed because the sound made me human again. But beneath the laughter was the thin wire of a question. If I look away, who looks for me? By dawn, I had something like data. All 6 cameras captured motion in the clearing, branches trembling, fog congealing. But whenever the eyes appeared, the feeds desynchronized, then snapped to the same 30 seconds of wind. I synced the audio tracks and found an artifact at 2 hertz, too low to hear but strong enough to rattle windows. Infrasound, fear's tuning fork. The woods weren't silent. They were playing a note that shook the hinges of thought like a door in a storm. Sleep deprivation clipped my words into fragments. My voice logs thinned into breaths, starts, stops, like a heart monitor trying to remember rhythm. On the last evening, I recorded a message to future me, a promise to break the ritual. I would stop watching, walk into the tree line, and prove the eyes were a skittish trick of angles. I told myself the forest was a mirror, and I was only learning the shape of my own vigilance. Then I turned off the porch light. Darkness stepped forward like a witness. The pressure changed, subtle as a held cough, and the temperature dropped enough to pearl my breath. I could feel it, the attention, sliding over me the way cold water finds the seams of a boat. I closed my eyes again, not counting this time. Footsteps approached, careful, considerate, as if not to break the moment. When I whispered into the recorder, the voice that answered wore my name like borrowed clothing. The recorder clicked, the cameras froze, and somewhere between blinks, the eyes slipped to the doorway, patient as snowfall, waiting for the moment memory would become proof. Then the whisper came closer, wearing my breath like borrowed frost tonight. Maybe the woods don't hide anything. Maybe they remember. The ground here hums. You can't hear it at first, not until you lie flat on the pine needles and press your ear to the soil. Then it begins, soft as breath, a low, pulsing vibration, steady as a heartbeat buried miles below. I first noticed it while cataloging root density near the ranger station. The soil recorder picked up frequencies that didn't belong to wind, insects, or water movement. When amplified, they formed a rhythm, slow, deliberate, almost patterned. The forest, it seemed, was speaking through the earth. We called it acoustic tunneling, a rare phenomenon where sound travels through layers of root systems. The theory was poetic, trees sharing information like a whisper network. But when I played back the recordings, something shattered the comfort of that science. Beneath the static were syllables, fractured words, a whisper that said, "Don't dig." At first, I laughed it off. Sleep deprivation, imagination, maybe an old radio signal bleeding into the equipment. But the next night it returned. Same coordinates, same frequency. This time, a full sentence. "Help me, please." The voice trembled like it was echoing through time, not distance. I froze. Rangers are trained for mountain lions, landslides, even the occasional lost hiker, not for pleas from beneath the ground. I ran the data through spectral filters. No anomaly. The waveform was human, undeniably. I matched it against missing persons reports, a grim exercise in curiosity. The timbre aligned eerily close to a woman who vanished 3 years ago, a botanist named Ellen Crane, last seen conducting soil studies near my current site. The idea burrowed into me like a seed finding water. Could the roots be carrying her last words? By the third night, curiosity outweighed reason. I marked the exact spot the voice originated from, a hollow between 2 dying pines. The ground felt warmer there, almost like flesh under a thin blanket of dirt. When I placed my hand flat against it, the hum intensified, vibrating up through my bones. My breath fogged the air in rhythmic bursts, sinking with that pulse beneath the surface. I whispered, "Ellen, are you there?" The soil trembled in response. Then came the whisper. Not through the recorder this time, but through the earth itself. The words were muffled, yet the tone was unmistakable. Despair. "They're still down here." My body went cold. They, not I. The distinction split the night open like lightning. I grabbed my shovel. Logic screamed at me to stop, but the forest felt alive with urgency, as if every tree leaned in to listen. The deeper I dug, the louder the vibrations grew until the metal struck something hollow. The sound that followed wasn't the ring of stone or wood. It was the echo of air escaping a sealed space. I peered into the opening, expecting darkness. Instead, I saw light, faint, green, and moving. It pulsed like a heartbeat trapped beneath the pines, and then, from deep below, came the sound of someone breathing. It had rhythm, a human rhythm. inhaling and exhaling in sync with mine, as though mimicking me from beneath the surface. I leaned closer, and for a moment, the sound stopped entirely, replaced by a silence so absolute it felt deliberate. Then faintly, the earth whispered my name. Not through the recorder, not imagined. Directly through the ground, as if the soil itself had learned my voice and was trying to give it back. I staggered backward, heart drumming against my ribs. The forest held its breath with me. I wanted to radio for help, to share this impossible discovery, but my equipment flickered, dead. The signal light blinked once, then vanished, like an eye closing. In the stillness, the hum returned, stronger, deeper, layered with 100 overlapping voices. Men, women, even children, all speaking beneath the pines, their words dissolving into one long, mournful vibration. Desperation breeds science. I dropped to my knees and set up the ground sensors again, recalibrating them to detect seismic patterns. The readings came in frantic waves, peaks forming shapes across the screen. Letters, words. The earth was spelling something. Help us. Each spike of sound matched the syllables perfectly. It wasn't Morse code. It was resonance, frequency language. My breath trembled as realization sank in. This wasn't the forest carrying echoes of the dead. It was a chorus of the buried. When the first tremor shook the clearing, I thought it was coincidence. Maybe a small quake. Maybe my mind fracturing under fatigue. But then, soil began to breathe. The ground rose and fell like a sleeping animal beneath a blanket of pine needles. My shovel rattled in the dirt. From the hole I dug, a faint green luminescence pulsed upward, painting my face in ghost light. Inside that light, shadows moved, long, sinuous shapes that resembled roots, but thicker, more purposeful. They writhed with slow intelligence, threading around one another in silence. The hum crescendoed until my eardrums throbbed. And then, all at once, it stopped. The stillness after the noise felt wrong, like a heartbeat pausing too long between beats. I leaned forward, my voice cracking through the cold air. "Ellen." The ground answered. Not as sound, but as vibration traveling through my fingertips and bones, like someone pressing words into my body. We listened too long. The hole collapsed inward. Soil swallowed the light and filled the clearing with the scent of wet earth. I fell back, gasping, as the vibrations retreated, sinking deeper until even the hum was gone. Only silence remained. Not natural silence, but something satisfied, like the end of a conversation. I sealed the area with caution tape the next morning and filed no report. How do you explain that the forest remembers what dies inside it? That it repeats their voices like a skipping record, each echo slightly more human than the last? Sometimes, when the wind dies, I still feel the ground humming beneath my boots. Faint, rhythmic, and familiar. I tell myself it's the earth's heartbeat, nothing more. But every now and then, when I press my ear to the soil, it whispers back the same thing. My name. Maybe the echoes aren't memories, maybe they're invitations, for the living to listen a little too long. It began as something small, barely noticeable, like the faint delay between breath and echo. Every morning, when the light slid through the thin glass of my cabin window, my shadow would fall across the wooden floorboards. But lately, it hadn't looked quite right. The angle was off. The stance was wrong. One hand seemed to hang lower than mine, as if gravity held it differently. At first, I blamed exhaustion. The forest has a way of bending your sense of time and shape, especially when the only company you keep is your own reflection in fogged glass. By the third morning, it wasn't exhaustion, it was disobedience. My shadow didn't mimic me anymore. When I raised my hand to drink my coffee, it hesitated. When I turned away, it lingered, frozen mid-motion like a paused video frame. I rubbed my eyes, half laughing at myself, half praying that caffeine would wake the rational part of my brain. Shadows don't move on their own. They can't. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet, ancient part of me, the same part that flinches at unseen movement, began to disagree. The changes grew bolder with every sunrise. When I leaned forward to tie my boots, my shadow seemed to straighten, watching me from the floor. The edges of it thickened, as though the sunlight struggled to define where I ended and it began. It even felt heavier in the room, the way humidity thickens air before a storm. One morning, I watched it tilt its head a few seconds before I did. My stomach turned cold. The air itself felt warped, like space between us had learned to think. I tried testing it. I placed my flashlight on the floor and aimed it across the room. My silhouette stretched tall on the far wall, flickering as the beam wavered. Then, deliberately, I stood perfectly still. The shadow didn't. Its hand twitched, the outline of its fingers curling toward the wall like smoke disturbed by breath. I switched the light off immediately, heart hammering. I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow wasn't attached to me anymore, that it was remembering me. I told no one. Who could I tell? A ranger's credibility is his lifeline. Shadow moving on its own isn't exactly field report material. Still, I started sleeping with the lights on, hoping to trap it in clarity. But even then, it seemed to flicker behind my eyelids. When I blinked, I could see it, darker, denser, patient. I began avoiding mirrors entirely. Reflection felt too close to recognition. On the seventh night, I woke to movement in the corner of my room. Faint but deliberate, the whisper of fabric against the wall. The lamp's glow quivered. My shadow stood upright, though I hadn't moved an inch. Slowly, it raised its hand, mimicking the gesture I made on the very first morning, the moment this began. Only now, I wasn't sure which of us was imitating the other. I didn't sleep after that. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the edge of the bed, watching the wall like it might breathe. Every few minutes I'd blink, and each time the shadow seemed to shift a little closer, as if the act of closing my eyes gave it permission to move. By dawn, the light through the window sliced it in half, and for a moment I thought the day had reclaimed me. But when I stood up, the split half on the wall didn't stand with me. It lingered in place, waiting. The rational part of me scrambled for science. Optical persistence, neural fatigue, the mind's tendency to invent movement in stillness. I repeated these explanations like prayers, each one thinner than the last. But when I reached for my radio to log an early patrol, the shadow raised its arm first. The gesture was unmistakable, slow, deliberate, almost mocking. My skin prickled, with that primal fear reserved for seeing yourself do something you didn't choose. I left the cabin. The sunlight outside felt thinner than usual, pale and stretched. On the ground beside me, my shadow followed, but not perfectly. Its stride lagged by a half second, dragging one leg through the gravel as if wading through thicker air. I quickened my pace. It didn't match me. Instead, it paused near the edge of the tree line, head turning toward the forest. I followed its gaze instinctively and froze. There, cast against the nearest pine, was another shadow, mine, but not connected to me. It moved freely across the bark, distorted, taller than it should have been. My heartbeat became a drum in my ears. The two shadows, mine and the one on the tree, faced each other like twin reflections on opposite sides of a mirror. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing between myself and whatever owned me. I stumbled backward, the ground soft beneath my boots. I looked down. There was no shadow beneath me anymore. Panic hit like cold water. My body felt lighter, unanchored. It's strange. We never think about our shadows until they're gone. They're proof that we exist in the world, that light recognizes us. Without one, I felt translucent, like the forest could see through my skin. I ran back to the cabin, bolting the door, dragging my lanterns close. The light felt desperate now, artificial and weak. On the far wall, the shadow reappeared, calm and complete, though I hadn't moved. It stood closer than before, almost touching the edge of my boots. The lantern flickered. The air thickened. I whispered to no one, "What do you want?" The shadow tilted its head, the same way I used to when studying strange tracks or distant echoes. Then it stepped forward. The lantern blew out. The world became pure outline, depthless, cold. I felt something press against my chest. Not heavy, not violent, just claiming. When they found the cabin days later, the lights were still on. My uniform hung neatly by the bed, boots placed side by side. But when they looked down, there was something missing. There was no shadow beneath it. The forest doesn't always take the body. Sometimes it only takes the part that voice I hadn't heard in years. The one that taught me how to navigate fog by smell, how to read silence like a map. "Base, this is Tower 9, do you copy?" The radio hissed to life at 2:37 a.m., a time when the forest holds its breath and even the owls go quiet. The call sign jolted me upright. Tower 9 had been decommissioned 3 decades ago, long before I joined the service. Officially, it didn't exist anymore. Burned in a lightning fire that left nothing but blackened steel bones. Yet the voice was clear, confident, familiar. I froze, the static crackling like dry branches in my ears. "Tower 9, this is base," I answered, half out of habit, half out of disbelief. The pause that followed felt endless. Then came the reply, calm and human and impossible. "Good to hear you again, kid." My stomach dropped. Only one person had ever called me that. My old mentor, Ranger Elias Crow, the man who trained me during my first season. He'd vanished without a trace 21 years ago on a foggy patrol near the same ridge where Tower 9 once stood. The rational part of my brain went to work. Misrouted frequency, overlapping channel, maybe a prank from some shortwave enthusiast. But the signal tone, that deep rhythmic beep, was unique to the Ranger network, encrypted and decades obsolete. No civilian could replicate it. "Elias?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. "You shouldn't be out here." The radio hummed softly, like it was holding its breath with me. Then the voice returned, rougher, fainter, layered with static. "Don't come looking, son. It's not gone." The words twisted around the noise like smoke in wind. Not gone. I replayed the transmission 3 times, isolating the frequencies. Each iteration revealed new fragments, echoes of wind, faint distortions that almost formed other voices. Background sound analysis showed no distortion delay, meaning it wasn't a recording. It was live. The forest itself seemed to be transmitting him. By sunrise, I'd made my decision. I packed my thermal gear, a compass, and a portable radio receiver. The coordinates of Tower 9 were long erased from official maps, but Elias once told me, "The forest keeps its own directions." I followed the old fireline road until the path disappeared into ash and overgrowth. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. Even the insects refused to speak. Hours later, the trees opened into a clearing, and there it was. The skeletal remains of Tower 9, standing like a ribcage against the pale sky. The metal was twisted, melted, fused together by lightning's kiss. I could smell the ghosts of ozone and burnt sap. At the base, the earth was scorched black, except for one patch of disturbed soil, freshly turned. My receiver crackled alive again. "Base, do you copy?" It was my own voice. My hand went cold on the receiver. The voice that came through wasn't similar to mine. It was identical. Tone, cadence, even the tiny breath between words. "Base, do you copy?" It repeated, this time weaker, as though broadcast from a distance too deep to locate. My instinct said interference. My body said run. But curiosity, that cursed instinct of rangers and scientists alike, pinned me where I stood. I pressed the button and answered myself. "Tower 9, this is base. Who are you?" Static, then faintly laughter. Not cruel, just tired, resigned, like someone who'd been awake for years. The sound rattled through the metal skeleton of the tower, bouncing upward until it disappeared into the fog above. I climbed the stairs, each step groaning like an old memory. The smell of rust mixed with wet pine. Halfway up, the air grew strangely warm, and I realized the steel under my hands wasn't cold at all. It pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in iron. The radio on my belt came alive again, now overlapping 2 signals. My voice calling from below, and another, deeper version of Elias whispering over it. "You shouldn't have come back," he said. The phrasing struck me. Back, not here. I reached the top platform, where the observation cabin used to be. What remained was melted glass, half a desk, and something blackened that looked eerily like a radio casing. I brushed away the ash. My glove caught on something metallic beneath it, a small object, warped from heat but still recognizable, my ID badge. The one clipped to my vest, the same one still pinned there now. My vision blurred for a second, as if the world had looped and placed two of me in the same frame. Then the static changed pitch. Not random anymore, rhythmic. I checked the frequency dial. It was cycling through stations on its own, tuning in and out of the forest's breath. Each burst of noise formed a word: stay with us. The tower began to hum again, vibrating under my boots. I stumbled to the edge and looked down. The clearing below shimmered faintly, a thin ripple spreading outward like heat above asphalt. Inside that distortion, faint outlines appeared, silhouettes of men in ranger uniforms, all standing in a circle around the tower's base. None of them cast shadows. I grabbed my field camera, snapping photo after photo. Each flash illuminated less of the world and more of them. The shapes didn't move closer, but their outlines sharpened, all of them facing upward toward me. My radio buzzed again, this time layered with multiple versions of my own voice whispering back at once. You hear it now, don't you? The tower never stopped calling. The hum reached a roar. I dropped the radio and the sound cut off instantly. For a heartbeat, the forest went dead silent. And then, from the receiver's tiny speaker, Elias's voice came through one final time. Base, it's your turn on watch. Later, when investigators recovered the melted radio from Tower 9, the only thing found intact inside was a badge. Mine. The timestamp on the final transmission read exactly 30 years old. There are trails that appear only when you stop looking for them. Faint outlines in fog, more suggestion than direction. That's how the lanterns began, flickering in the mist like will-o'-the-wisps. They appeared one night when the forest swallowed the moon. I'd just finished my shift and was heading back to the ranger cabin when the first light shimmered between the trees. Warm, gold, and impossibly steady for a flame and mountain wind. At first, I assumed campers had wandered too far. The park was closed that week due to unstable terrain, but trespassers were common. I followed the glow, boots crunching over frost and dead pine needles. As I moved deeper, another lantern ignited ahead, then another, until a line of them stretched into the dark like breadcrumbs left by a ghost. Each one swung gently, as if guided by unseen hands. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No crickets, no wind. Only the faint metallic creak of the lanterns swaying from invisible hooks. When I turned to check my path, the trail behind me was gone, swallowed by fog so thick it looked solid. I should have stopped, but the air had that strange electricity of discovery, like the moments before a thunderstorm when the world feels too still to be real. I reached a clearing where the light gathered into a circle. In the center stood a single wooden post, cracked, splintered, and charred with age. One lantern burned on top, its glass smudged with fingerprints. Beneath it, half buried in the soil, something metallic caught my eye. I knelt down and brushed away the dirt. It was a knife, standard ranger issue, the kind we carried decades ago. The handle was carved with initials that stopped my breath cold, my own. I stared at it, tracing each letter with shaking fingers. It was identical to the one I kept in my cabin drawer, down to the scratch near the hilt, the mark from when I dropped it last summer. But that was impossible. This one had been here for years, maybe longer. I looked up again. The lanterns flickered one by one as though reacting to my realization. The fog thickened, curling like smoke. The air smelled faintly of burning pine and metal, ozone after lightning. I heard a faint sound beyond the clearing, footsteps, steady and measured, echoing from no direction and every direction at once. They stopped just outside the circle of light. I called out, but my voice sounded distant, absorbed by the mist before it reached the trees. The last lantern trembled violently, flame bending sideways as though something had passed through it. Then slowly it began to dim. The others followed, snuffing out in sequence, one after another, until only the faint glow from the knife reflected against my shaking hands. And in that darkness, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't alone. Someone was standing just behind me, every nerve in my body tightening like wire. There was no one there. Just fog, thick, colorless, pulsing faintly in rhythm with my heartbeat. But I could still feel the presence, close enough to move the air, close enough to make the hair on my arms rise. The silence pressed against me like water. Somewhere inside it, I heard faint breathing. Not human. Too slow. Too deep. Like the forest itself was inhaling through lungs made of soil. I grabbed the knife, its handle icy in my hand. The blade caught the last glimmer from the dying lantern, painting a thin line of trembling gold across the fog. I took a cautious step backward, trying to retrace the way I came. But the path had dissolved into haze. No lanterns, no footprints. The world had reset into an endless gray. I thought about dropping a trail marker, but when I reached for my radio, the screen was already dead. Fog crystallized on the display. That's when the light returned. Not ahead, but beneath me. The ground shimmered faintly, threads of green glowing through the soil, pulsing outward in veins. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of bioluminescent fungus. Then the pulse quickened, in sync with my racing heart. It wasn't light leaking through the ground. It was responding. The more I moved, the brighter it grew, mapping my steps like veins in the earth. Panic began to bloom. I walked faster, then ran. Every stride illuminated the ground beneath me, in frantic flashes, as if something below were chasing the vibration of my footsteps. The forest was alive, not metaphorically, but observant. Every heartbeat, every breath was answered by that glowing pulse beneath my boots. It wasn't following. It was tracking. The fog thinned for a moment, revealing something ahead. A tree. Massive, ancient, its trunk split wide open like a wound. The lanterns were back, hanging from its branches in perfect symmetry, each one burning with steady, patient flame. They didn't sway this time. They waited. The tree's hollow glowed faintly green from within. Against every instinct, I stepped closer. Inside the hollow, I found the impossible. Fragments of old ranger uniforms, rusted radios, and a line of knives just like mine, all driven into the wood like offerings. Each one bore initials, all of them mine, different years carved into their handles: 1986, 1998, 2012, 2025. A sequence spanning decades of service I never lived. The last lantern above me flickered violently, casting my shadow onto the tree. It didn't match my movements. My reflection leaned closer, eyes hollow and mouth whispering words I couldn't hear. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, searing. I stumbled back, knife clattering to the roots. When I blinked, the lanterns were gone. The fog was gone. Dawn had arrived, pale and thin, stretching across a clearing that shouldn't exist. No tree, no lights, only my own footprints circling the spot where I'd stood. Later, when I returned to my cabin, I opened my drawer. The knife was gone. Some trails guide you home. Others remind you that you've already been there, just not as yourself. We were 5 rangers that morning, standard perimeter patrol through a valley that wasn't supposed to exist. The topographic maps listed it as a gradual slope, but the terrain dipped suddenly, hidden by layers of mist that rolled like surf. The air there was unnaturally still, heavy with the scent of wet stone and pine resin. I remember thinking the silence felt too perfect, as though the forest was holding something in its throat. At first it was just another hike. We joked about coffee gone cold and radios that never worked when you needed them. The path was narrow, half-eaten by roots, forcing us into single file. My GPS showed nothing, just static and a looping coordinate reading. $1,000. That should have been impossible. When I looked up, the trees seemed closer together, their branches overlapping like fingers clasped in prayer. We found the clearing around noon. It wasn't marked on any map, a perfect circle of open ground surrounded by impossibly straight pines. The soil there was pale, almost white, and the air felt thick with static. At its center lay a scatter of bones, hundreds, maybe thousands. They weren't buried. They'd been arranged. Rings upon rings of small animal skulls spiraling inward toward a single shape I couldn't identify. Not human, not animal. Something between the two. No one spoke for a long time. Then Davis, our youngest, muttered, "You ever seen something that looks like it's been waiting for you?" His voice cracked on the last word. I told him to check his GPS again. Same static reading. Then he frowned. "We're not on any grid. It's blank." The radio on his shoulder hissed softly, spitting fragments of reversed speech. Our own voices, looping backward like a tape winding the wrong way. We tried turning back, retracing our route, but every direction led us back into the clearing. Even the light felt wrong. The sun hung at the same height, shadows refusing to move. Sweat gathered under my collar despite the cold. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. The compass needles spun lazily in circles, never settling. When it happened, it was quiet. 1 second Davis was walking ahead of me, crunching over dry needles. The next, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, no impression of absence, just the space where he should have been. His footprint stopped mid-stride. The air where he'd stood shimmered faintly, like heat above asphalt. We called his name until our throats burned, but the forest swallowed the sound whole. That was when panic finally set in. We moved fast, too fast, stumbling through trees that felt too symmetrical, too deliberate. Every few minutes, another of us would swear we saw Davis just ahead, a glimpse of his uniform vanishing behind a trunk, only to find nothing but air. By dusk, there were only 3 of us left. The clearing had reappeared ahead, waiting, unbothered, unchanged. The bones gleamed like wet porcelain under the dying light. That's when I realized the circle had grown larger. The circle had doubled in size. The outer ring of bones now reached the edge of the tree line, encircling us like a trap that had quietly expanded while we weren't looking. None of us spoke. The silence was too dense, pressing against our lungs, making each breath sound foreign. My radio crackled once, just a whisper of static, then a faint voice. 5 entered, 1 returns. The words slurred and repeated, overlapping themselves until they dissolved into a long, low hum. We should have run, but fear roots a person deeper than any tree ever could. I knelt beside one of the skulls, a deer, jaw unhinged as if mid-scream. The bones were clean, too clean, polished by something more deliberate than weather. When I reached out to touch it, the ground vibrated beneath my glove, a low tremor rolling outward through the circle. Every skull turned slightly, not all at once, but gradually, like they were realigning to look at me. Bennett cursed under his breath and swung his flashlight toward the ridge. The beam fractured, scattering through the fog like shattered glass. For a heartbeat, we saw outlines in the mist, figures shaped like men, tall and narrow, their faces blank as though carved from the air itself. When the beam passed over them, the outlines didn't vanish. They shifted, each one stepping closer between blinks. "Move!" I shouted, my voice cracking against the stillness. We broke into a sprint, crashing through brush and deadfall. But every path bled into another clearing, another ring of bones, each one smaller and tighter. It was as though the forest was folding inward, remapping itself around us. I stumbled and fell, palms sinking into cold soil that pulsed faintly under my touch, like a living vein running beneath the surface. By the time I looked up, Bennett was gone. Only the echo of his breathing remained, reverberating from nowhere. I turned in circles, desperate for sound, but all I could hear was my own pulse. And beneath it, a second one, slower, deeper, belonging to something else entirely. When I reached the valley edge, the trees opened into a perfect mirror of where we began. Same clearing, same bones, only now the center was empty. No strange figure, no shimmer, just a small object resting in the dirt. I approached cautiously and froze. It was my GPS. The display flickered, coordinates locked at near 0 chow ano $1,000, battery icon full though I'd watched it die hours before. The screen pulsed once, then split in 2 like a heartbeat, flashing words I will never forget. "You were the 5th. The world blinked. I was alone. No footprints, no equipment, no proof that anyone else had ever been there. My radio sputtered once, long enough for a final whisper to bleed through. "Copy that. Patrol complete." When I stumbled back to the station at dawn, soaked and shivering, the supervisor said there'd been no patrol scheduled, no team assigned, no record of my departure. Weeks later, I checked satellite maps of the valley. The clearing was gone. Just dense forest, as if the earth had swallowed the evidence whole. But sometimes, when the wind dies, I still hear 5 sets of footsteps, harmless, objective, repeatable. Carbon dioxide readings that didn't match anything in the park's seasonal logbook. Every night the forest exhaled more than it should have, the CO2 levels spiking like clockwork just after midnight. I thought it was an instrument error. Machines hiccup all the time in humidity this thick. But when I recalibrated, replaced batteries, even moved the sensors to new coordinates, the pattern held. The forest wasn't breathing like vegetation. It was breathing like something alive. I'd been reassigned here from a university climate lab, a quiet post meant to clear my head. Fresh air, new data, my supervisor said. The trees will take care of you. Funny how literal that phrase became. The Smoky Mountains stretched endlessly around me, every ridge a ripple of green lungs. The air was pure enough to taste, metallic with mist and pollen. But some nights it felt heavier, thick, deliberate, like it was passing through something conscious before reaching me. On the 6th night, the reading spiked so sharply the sensors overloaded. I went out to replace them and felt the pressure change instantly, like the atmosphere itself had leaned closer. The wind stopped. Even the crickets muted. My flashlight beam cut through fog that seemed to pulse, contracting and expanding in waves that matched my heartbeat. I crouched beside one of the sensors, hand hovering over it, and realized the ground beneath my palm was rising and falling. Not trembling, breathing. I remember whispering to the dark, "That's impossible," though my voice already sounded swallowed. The forest inhaled again, drawing warmth out of my lungs, then exhaled, a slow, humid sigh that rattled the leaves around me. My rational brain screamed theories, underground methane pockets, pressure shifts, maybe thermal expansion. But each explanation melted under the weight of that rhythm. It wasn't mechanical, it was organic. The next morning I ran a full spectrograph analysis. The airflow frequencies mapped into patterns too precise to be random. Bell curve peaks repeating at 23-second intervals. Biological consistency. I sent the data to the university, marked urgent. The reply came hours later. Inconclusive readings, likely sensor interference. I stared at that message until dawn, wondering how interference could synchronize with the pulse of soil. On the 8th night, I couldn't resist. I set up a microphone at ground level, sensitive enough to catch the whisper of roots moving through loam. At 2:14 a.m., the forest inhaled again, and the waveform on my laptop came alive. A deep oscillation that wasn't just wind, but tone. Beneath it, faint harmonics formed patterns too deliberate to ignore. Like language, like words hidden inside the air itself. Then I heard it, a faint modulation that curved into something unmistakable. My own name, stretched and distorted through layers of living breath. It didn't sound hostile. It sounded curious. I shut the laptop, heart hammering against my ribs. The forest around me went still, patient, waiting for me to inhale again. And when I finally did, I swear it matched me. Breath for breath, heartbeat for heartbeat. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the rhythm beneath the cabin. The subtle rise and fall of something vast inhaling below me. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was psychosomatic, the result of stress and sleeplessness. But when I stepped outside, the fog hung unusually low, hugging the ground as if reluctant to leave. The air tasted processed, like it had been used before reaching my lungs. I couldn't shake the feeling that every breath I took was borrowed. Determined to reclaim logic, I returned to the ridge where the readings first spiked. The sensors blinked steadily, little green lights pulsing like synchronized heartbeats. I adjusted one, crouching close. The ground was warm again, not surface heat, but something radiating upward, a slow transfer from deep below. My instruments picked it up instantly. Pressure fluctuation, humidity shift, CO2 dip followed by a rapid surge. A perfect respiratory cycle. The trees stood motionless, yet the sound was undeniable now. Faint at first, then undeniable. A deep, resonant hum that rippled through the forest like a whispered chant. Leaves quivered without wind. The trunks vibrated in sympathy, low frequencies traveling up their spines of wood and sap. The forest was resonating, tuning itself. And somewhere in that tremor, beneath the noise of the world, there was a pattern. I placed my hand against the nearest tree, an old hemlock with bark like fossilized skin. It was vibrating softly under my palm, the rhythm steady and strong. And then I heard it again, that modulation in the low frequency, like vowels spoken underwater. My name breathed through the bark, repeated faintly as if echoing across time. "You know us," it said. Not words exactly, but meaning felt directly inside the body, like comprehension skipping language altogether. My breath hitched. I stumbled back, adrenaline slamming through me. The forest responded instantly. The hum grew louder, a wave traveling outward in all directions. Birds erupted from the canopy, scattering like sparks from a flame. The fog shifted and rolled, revealing a faint shimmer across the forest floor, a rippling pattern that looked eerily like airflow mapping. I realized then that the forest wasn't just breathing air. It was breathing memory. I bolted back to camp, laptop clutched like a relic. When I replayed the recordings later, the spectrogram revealed something impossible. My voice layered beneath the hum, snippets from my field notes, my radio transmissions, even things I'd whispered to myself when I thought I was alone. The forest had been listening, recording, repeating. I sent everything to the university again, marked urgent. Potential discovery. The reply came 12 hours later, a brief message. We reviewed the files. There is no sound. Are you feeling unwell? That night I sat outside under a sky too quiet to be real. The trees loomed black against the stars, still and knowing. I closed my eyes, took one deliberate breath, and whispered into the dark, "What are you?" The forest exhaled, soft, tender, endless, and within that wind, I heard it answer back. "What are you? Maybe the air we breathe isn't ours. Maybe it's the forest remembering, one breath at a time." I used to trust maps more than people. Lines don't lie, coordinates don't falter, and paper never forgets where you've been. That certainty kept me sane through years of ranger service, until the day the maps began to change. It started subtly, like a trick of memory. A small lake I'd crossed countless times simply wasn't there on the printed sheet anymore. When I checked the digital overlay, the system displayed a perfect field of green. No body of water, no evidence it had ever existed. At first I thought it was a glitch in the GIS database, some update lagged between the field system and headquarters. But then the trails began to shift. Routes that should have taken me east toward the ranger tower curved inexplicably south, ending in dead forest. Even my compass seemed indecisive, its needle spinning lazy circles as though magnetized by indecision itself. The forest wasn't static anymore. It was editing. I decided to prove it. I spent 3 days recharting the same 12-mile section of terrain, marking every rock, bend, and stream. I drew by hand, measured by step, calibrated by instinct. When I finished, the map was clean and perfect, a reflection of the world I trusted. I pinned it on the cabin wall, proud of the precision. But by morning, the lines had shifted. A ridge that ran north now veered northwest. The creek that curved like a snake had vanished altogether. Even the ink seemed unsettled, faintly smudged as if the paper itself was trying to forget. The human brain hates inconsistency. I hiked back into the same section, certain I'd find the truth in daylight. But the landmarks betrayed me. Where the creek once flowed, there was nothing but dry leaves and silence. The terrain felt off-kilter, familiar yet rearranged, as if someone had dragged reality slightly to the left while I slept. I checked my GPS. It blinked, no location found. The signal light pulsed irregularly, matching the rhythm of my own heartbeat. By evening, my nerves began to fray. I hiked faster, relying on instinct rather than coordinates. But instinct was useless. The trees pressed closer, rearranging their ranks like soldiers closing formation. The forest was no longer something I moved through. It was something that moved around me. When I finally stumbled upon a familiar clearing, I nearly cried with relief. My tower stood in the distance, its frame outlined against a bruised sky. I climbed to the top, panting, only to feel the world shift under my feet. The horizon no longer aligned. The ridges bent wrong. The valley below was unfamiliar, trees forming patterns too geometric to be natural. I unfolded my map to compare, praying for something stable, but the paper was blank. The entire page had turned to foggy white, as if the ink had evaporated overnight. My coordinates, trails, and markers all gone. Only one faint handwritten note remained in the corner, written in my own hand, but not my memory. I stared at the Don't map until my eyes blurred. It maps you. The handwriting was mine. Same slope, same uneven curl in the P, the kind you develop when writing by lantern light. But I had no memory of writing those words. The air inside the tower felt charged, the way it does before lightning strikes. Molecules vibrating, waiting. I traced the note with my finger, the ink still faintly damp, as though time itself had just written it. Below, the forest looked rearranged. The familiar trail leading toward the ranger station was gone, replaced by an unbroken carpet of trees. Every direction was identical. No rivers, no clearings, no exit. For the first time in my career, I couldn't tell which way was north. My compass needle spun, clattering softly against the glass like an insect trapped in a jar. I opened my pack, desperate for something stable, and pulled out my backup map, a laminated one sealed from moisture and age. It, too, was blank. That's when the wind started. It didn't move through the trees, it moved between them, like a hand brushing past curtains. The air seemed to pull inward, whispering through branches that didn't quite match the sound of wind. I descended the tower slowly, every step creaking as if the structure itself was uncertain of its own weight. At the bottom, I unfolded the blank paper again. Something was appearing. Lines were sketching themselves faintly into existence, forming not geography but movement, pathways that curved and pulsed like veins. The map was drawing me. Each heartbeat seemed to darken the ink. My location dot pulsed red at the edge of a vast circular shape labeled simply Observation Zone. I had never heard of such a designation. The trails on the map looped around it endlessly, never crossing its border. My hands trembled. When I looked up, the forest in front of me was subtly different. Trees taller, shadows longer, perspective slightly warped, as though the world was conforming to what the map believed, not the other way around. I walked anyway. I needed proof that the ground beneath my boots still obeyed physics. Every few steps I checked the map, and every few steps the trail I'd just walked vanished from it. The forest behind me folded in on itself, replaced by blankness. I couldn't retrace a single footprint. Panic rose, sharp and metallic. I tore the map in half, but both pieces kept redrawing. The ink refused to die. The path ended at a clearing I didn't recognize, a perfect circle of flattened grass, silent except for a faint hum rising from the soil. I looked down. The map's red dot, my dot, now rested in the center of the observation zone. The lines around it converged inward, sealing like a closing eye. The ink bled outward across the paper, swallowing everything. When I looked up, the trees had changed again. My tower was gone. The horizon was blank, no ridges, no sky, only fog curling inward like thought erasing itself. The paper in my hand grew hot, then cold, then blank once more. That's when I realized I wasn't lost. I'd been absorbed. Later, when the next ranger was assigned to my post, he found a single map pinned to the cabin wall. It showed no trails, no landmarks, just a red dot labeled Unmapped Zone. It started as a tremor in the air, something you don't hear so much as feel. Low, steady, like the deep hum of an engine buried miles below the surface. Most rangers wouldn't have noticed it, but I'd trained my ear for anomalies, missing frequencies, unnatural silence, anything the forest wasn't supposed to produce. At first I thought it was interference from a nearby substation, maybe seismic activity. But the readings didn't match. The sound was too clean, too intentional. We set up 3 recording points across the valley. Each sensor captured the same vibration at exactly 19.8 hertz, the edge of human perception. The frequency known in acoustics as the fear tone. It sits just below what the ear can process, but the body feels it. A faint pressure behind the eyes, a tension in the gut. The primitive alarm bell that evolution built before language. My colleague joked that the forest had a soundtrack. I didn't laugh. By the second week, the sound grew stronger. The trees themselves seemed to carry it, their trunks acting like tuning forks. Birds stopped nesting near the valley. Deer abandoned the ridge entirely, and every night, as I filed my reports, that invisible vibration pressed against the cabin windows, making the glass quiver like something trying to get in. I told myself it was coincidence, but fear isn't logical. It's ancient, chemical, contagious. Then came the first sighting. A night patrol reported movement near the sound's epicenter. A figure, tall and indistinct, standing perfectly still among the trees. They described it not as seen, but sensed, like the space it occupied rejected light. When the floodlights hit the clearing, nothing was there. Yet the audio monitor spiked to 20 hertz exactly, a heartbeat captured in frequency. I reviewed the recordings frame by frame. The sound wasn't continuous. It pulsed, irregularly at first, then rhythmically, matching human respiration. And beneath the main tone, I detected something else. Harmonics forming faint melodic arcs, almost like breathing layered in reverse. The forest was singing in a language made of pressure. Sleep became impossible. The hum persisted, even inside my skull. Earplugs didn't help. The vibration was internal, resonating in bone and blood. I found myself waking at the same hour every night, 3:11 a.m., the precise time when the signal reached its peak. The data formed a pattern resembling a sine wave interrupted by a heartbeat. Not nature, not machine, something that listened back. On the 10th night, I made a mistake. I took a portable speaker to the clearing and played the frequency in reverse. To mirror the sound, I wrote in my notes. The moment I did, the forest answered. Every tree groaned at once like lungs exhaling. The air condensed and shapes began to flicker between trunks. Elongated, shimmering distortions, bending space like heat. My instruments went dead. My recording gear snapped with static, freezing on one final image, the waveform pulsing in perfect sync with mine. And just before everything went silent, I heard my own voice whisper back through the headphones. Not echo, not playback. Stop listening. When the recording cut out, the silence was violent. It wasn't peace, it was absence. Even my heartbeat seemed to hesitate before catching up. The forest had gone perfectly still, the kind of stillness that makes you aware of every small sound your body makes. Breath, blood, thought. I waited for something to move, to remind me that the world hadn't frozen. But the trees stood rigid, locked in some shared anticipation, as if they too were listening. I backed away slowly, speaker still humming faintly in my hand. Its LED blinked irregularly, pulsing to a rhythm I recognized. One beat too slow for human. I switched it off. The light didn't stop. I smashed the battery compartment open, wires sparking against my glove, but the glow remained. Faint, red, alive. It wasn't electricity. It was resonance. By dawn, I was back at my cabin, determined to archive everything. The waveforms, the patterns, the timestamps. The files refused to open. Every audio log had corrupted into an identical track. 3 minutes, 11 seconds of what sounded like my own breathing. But when I increased playback speed, it formed a coherent pulse. Heartbeats accelerating, layering over one another until they fused into the same 19.8 hertz vibration. It was me. I'd become part of the signal. That night, I heard it again. Clearer now, sharper, threading through the wind like the low growl of a faraway storm. My hands trembled as I set up a fresh recorder. The sensors came alive instantly, their needles spiking with perfect precision. The frequency was steady, almost hypnotic. I found myself breathing in rhythm with it. Then faintly another sound emerged beneath it. Whispers, reversed and stretched until meaning dissolved. When I flipped the waveform, it wasn't gibberish anymore, it was words. My voice. Keep listening. The realization hit like cold lightning. I slammed the laptop shut and stumbled outside, gasping for real air. But the forest breathed with me, the trees flexing, the ground vibrating with the same inaudible tone. Every part of it moved in sync, a vast organism inhaling thought. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside me now, vibrating my teeth, resonating against my ribs. In that vibration came images, not seen but felt. The valley from above, a spiral of light forming in the canopy. Shapes moving beneath the soil, ancient and slow. The hum wasn't just a sound. It was a message carried in matter, a pattern the world had been humming long before language learned to describe it. Then the tone stopped. The forest deflated with a soft sigh. My knees buckled under the sudden weight of quiet. When I looked up, the clearing glowed faintly red, as though the heartbeat had left a footprint behind. I walked closer, drawn without will, until I stood at its center. My field recorder lay half buried in dirt. Its screen flickered one last time, displaying a waveform that looked unmistakably like an EKG. The steady pulse of something alive, Only this one didn't belong to me. The official report lists it as infrasound interference. But sometimes, when the wind crawls through the trees just right, I can feel the hum inside my bones again. Not as fear, but as recognition. The woods don't make sound until I began connecting the dots. 10 stories, 10 rangers, 10 accounts of things that shouldn't have existed. Eyes in the dark, breathing soil, voices beneath the ground, sounds that lived below hearing. Each incident separated by years, yet all traced to the same coordinates buried in an archived report labeled Observation Zone. The file was old, almost erased, redacted black lines, missing timestamps, entire pages that looked like they'd been burned before being scanned. But the coordinates were clear, and they matched the valley I'd patrolled all season. Curiosity turned into compulsion. I spread every recovered log across my desk. Written notes, audio cassettes, half-corrupted data files. Different rangers, different years, same anomaly. Forest appears aware. The phrasing repeated like a mantra. One entry chilled me more than the rest. A final transcript from Ranger Elias Crow, dated 1984. His last words. It moved closer when I stopped watching. I printed the map overlays and pinned them to the wall. When layered, the paths each ranger took formed a pattern. Concentric circles converging toward a single point. Not random, intentional, like we'd all been orbiting something hidden. The center was marked with a simple label, Zone 0, I couldn't sleep. The thought gnawed at me. What if the forest hadn't been reacting to us? What if it had been testing us? Watching, learning, recording? The scientific part of me whispered probability and coincidence. But the human part, the one that dreams, whispered something else. Design. At 2:00 a.m., I grabbed my pack, recorder, and field lights. The sky was moonless, the air thin and metallic. The forest loomed darker than I'd ever seen it, like the night had thickened. The trail bent where it shouldn't have, yet my GPS stayed locked on course. My breath clouded in front of me, white against the endless black. I reached the coordinates just before dawn. The valley opened suddenly when a wide basin where the mist pooled thick and still. I expected trees, rocks, maybe remnants of the observation posts noted in the archives. Instead, I found geometry. The trees weren't random here. They formed lines, perfect mathematical, like ribs of a colossal organism. I walked their pattern slowly, tracing it with my flashlight beam, until realization stopped me cold. From the ground, it was impossible to see. But from above, from a satellite or a drone, the formation would resemble an eye. The trees, the ridges, even the shadows fell into its shape. The forest wasn't just watching, it was the watcher. A soft wind stirred the leaves, carrying with it the faint scent of ozone and smoke, the same smell that lingered at every vanished site. My recorder clicked on by itself. Through the static came dozens of voices layered atop one another. Old transmissions, whispers, even my own words. Then came a new voice, calm and deep, almost amused. You finally found it. The voice didn't echo. It resonated, deep, slow, and heavy enough to bend the air around it. My first instinct was to look for a radio source, maybe an interference signal bouncing off the ridgeline. But the valley was empty, my receiver lights dead. The sound came from everywhere at once, carried by the ground, the trees, even the fog itself. My skin prickled. I pressed record. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling through the static. The reply came as vibration more than speech, syllables forming inside the low hum that always lived in these woods. "You are?" Just 2 words, but they struck like a physical blow. Not because of what they meant, but because I knew they were true. I stumbled backward, breath stuttering. My flashlight flickered across the valley, catching glimpses of movement between the trunks. Silhouettes tall as trees, shifting in rhythm with my breath. Not wind. My data recorder sputtered alive, flashing through old file logs. Audio fragments from every ranger's final moments played on a loop. It's beneath me. It's listening. Don't map it. And finally, my own voice whispering back, stop listening. The forest wasn't echoing us. It was replaying us. Decades of fear, observation, and language, absorbed, processed, respoken. We'd been feeding it with every word, every note, every breath. The ground beneath me pulsed again. Faint, rhythmic, organic. I dropped to my knees, pressing my palm against the soil. It felt warm, not like sun-warmed rock, but body warm, the kind of warmth that implies pulse. I realized then that the eye shape carved into the landscape wasn't symbolic. It was anatomical. The forest was an organism, massive, distributed, and alive. Each tree a neuron, each ranger a fleeting synapse in its endless act of awareness. I tried to run, but the fog had thickened into something tactile, clinging to my skin, pulling at my clothes. The trees shifted subtly as I moved, trunks bending in imperceptible degrees, closing me in like ribs around a lung. My flashlight flickered once more, then died. In that darkness, the valley exhaled. The wind carried whispers not of fear, but of recognition. Thousands of layered voices, all versions of us, all repeating the same phrase. "We see you." Something deep within the forest began to glow, faintly red, then gold as if firelight pulsed behind the earth itself. The light spread upward through the trunks, tracing the shape of the great eye until it surrounded me completely. I could feel its attention now, curious, ancient, vast. My recorder vibrated violently in my pocket, and I realized it was transmitting without my touch. Across every frequency, every channel, my own voice now spoke on its behalf. Observation complete. The glow dimmed. The hum faded. Dawn broke pale and cold over an ordinary forest. But I knew better. When I checked my gear, the GPS data told an impossible truth. Every path I'd taken that night traced the exact outline of a human iris. We thought we were watching the forest, but all along it was documenting us, mapping the shape of our fear, one story at a time. Subscribe, if you dare.